Hello and welcome to the Skinopathy podcast featuring Dr. Jerry Tan, a renowned dermatologist and the president of the Acne and Rosacea Society of Canada. And my name is Richard Pietro, and I'll be your host as we go beyond the medicine and take you behind the scenes to show you how healthcare works and tell you the stories you don't always hear about. Hello, Dr. Tan.
Richard, great to see you again.
In the last episode, we talked about why there are so few dermatologists in Canada. Today, though, we're going to be talking about myths. Myths about skin products, myths about skin diseases, and myths about skin doctors. But first, for everyone who's listening, don't forget to visit getskinhelp.com and have that suspicious lesion or skin condition checked out by a skin specialist online. Everything is covered by your Canadian health card, and we'll put the links in the description for you guys to follow. Now that we have that out of the way, Dr. Tan, are you ready to take on your first myth?
Absolutely.
All right.
Go for it, Richard.
All right. The first one is, I need a referral to see a dermatologist. Is that a myth?
It is actually not a myth, and it will vary from province to province, and it also will vary depending on the condition. For example, medical conditions of the skin or hair or nails do require a medical practitioner to evaluate it because there may be some downside risk if it's not properly diagnosed and managed. And because of that, typically there is a gatekeeping function of the family physician because many of these conditions may be very well managed at that level. And the ones that are uncertain, unclear, potentially dangerous, that's what the specialists are here to help with. On the other hand, there are also a number of conditions that are completely aesthetic or alteration of appearance without any underlying risk of disease that pre-exists that alteration or that potential procedure. And for example, let's say lip fillers or Botox, all of those types of procedures for alteration of appearance for, quote, aesthetic reasons do not require a referral because typically that's not considered a medical condition.
And unless I'm mistaken, I'm maybe talking out of school a little bit here, physicians or dermatologists at the very least, if they do get a patient coming in via a referral from a general practitioner, they get to bill, at least in Ontario, get to bill the ministry just a little bit more than if it was just sort of a quote unquote walk-in. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. The differential is about $30 or so. And that is not inconsequential because remember on our last podcast, we had indicated that the consultation with a referral, the fee in OHIP in Ontario is about $70+. So the differential of $30+ is just less than half as much.
Yeah. It's a big difference.
Yeah, it's quite different. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to myth number 2, which is a little bit lighter in nature, and it's definitely something that has sort of followed me throughout my life, which is, does shaving hair, like body hair, make it grow coarser or thicker? Sort of that thing that we all saw in that one episode of Seinfeld.
I missed that episode, Richard, but it must have been one of the few I missed. So I like that question because I'm going to use a pen to demonstrate.
Oh, wow.
And the reason I'm going to use this pen to demonstrate is because you can see as that pen comes out of your hair follicle, the first part is thinner and then it gets thicker and thicker and thicker. Okay. As we get closer to the growing part, the larger part of that growing hair follicle, the shaft itself increases in diameter, whereas the earliest part that was growing is much thinner. Now, when you shave, depending on where you shave, if you're shaving very early on, it doesn't look like you're making much difference to the diameter of the hair. But as the hair continues to grow out, then that shaft becomes wider in diameter, and it looks like shaving is making the hair more coarse and thick. It's not shaving that's doing it. It's just the growth of hair that's changing from much thinner at the initial younger phase to much thicker at its full out growth phase.
So for those, it's interesting that you say that, because in the Seinfeld episode, what they're saying is that if you shave your chest as a man, just to get rid of some of these little patches, you'll grow into a Sasquatch. And what you're saying, that is not the case. It's not as though you're going to have more hair follicles growing out of your chest if you're shaving your chest regularly.
I think that's actually I'm just laughing because I'm getting the visual imagery. No, that will not happen.
All right, let's move on to myth number 3, which is a little bit more serious in nature, and we're sort of going all over the place here on purpose. But dark-skinned individuals don't get skin cancer.
That definitely is a myth. Dark-skinned individuals are also at risk of skin cancer, and one of the reasons why is, number one, our skin is the largest organ in the body. It has the greatest surface area. And humans are marvels of biology. It's just remarkable that we can function in a way that doesn't lead to more problems on a day-to-day basis. But part of that is because of how beautifully structured our feedback loops and mechanisms are. And one of the problems is if any of those feedback loops don't quite work properly, then we may have unintended consequences and unhindered growth of certain skin clones. And that can lead then to skin cancers, precancers, and so on. One of the reasons that myth exists is because it is thought that darker skin has a much higher protection from one of the most common triggers for skin cancer, which is ultraviolet light, sunlight. But remember, ultraviolet light is only one of many triggers for abnormal skin biology and skin behavior. So just because they have more pigment doesn't mean they're not at also increased risk of skin cancer. All humans are, because we are biological wonders that sometimes go awry.
You said a moment ago that UV rays are not the only triggers to potential skin cancers. I'm assuming some of the other ones are just your basic genetics.
Genetics, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. In fact, there are some genetic conditions where there are detection and deletion mechanisms of abnormalities that aren't functioning properly. And when they don't function properly, you know, even our chromosomes are evaluated and monitored. And if those monitoring systems aren't functioning properly, then some of the missense mutations might go on to propagate into abnormal cell types.
What about diet? Or for example, smoking? Like smoking will lead to lung cancer, as everyone knows. But is there anything sort of that can lead, like not environmental, I don't know what the term is, but something that you are doing actively that is promoting skin cancer, aside from not wearing sunscreen and sunbathing?
Yeah, there are some fairly classical skin cancer agents that have been important through the centuries, and one of the most important is arsenic. And
Oh,
you might think, what? Well, isn't that like paired with old lace? Well, arsenic is actually a fairly ubiquitous chemical that in the past, when water wasn't properly tested, there was a lot of arsenic in some of the well waters in the countryside. And there are certain parts of North America where, prior to appropriate water testing, that populations in that area, drinking well water, had a lot of exposure to that type of chemical that then led to chromosomal abnormalities and increased risk of skin cancer. In fact, in an area where I trained many well, let's not age myself that much. In the past, let's just say, in Michigan, we used to see a lot of patients come in from the Upper Peninsula where there was a lot of well water. And at that point, there was decades past where it was not properly tested and evaluated. And a lot of these patients who presented had a form of skin cancer, multiple basal cell cancers that were related to that specific problem, arsenic exposure in well water.
Wow. I just definitely learned something that well water can lead to skin cancer. There's something particularly fascinating about that. And I'm so glad that we're having these moments with you, Dr. Tan. I'm sure you're helping a whole bunch of people with your insights.
Oh, if you are using well water, do have it tested. There are
Mm.
some excellent resources for testing well water. Many people who live in the countryside are well aware of some of the hazards of well water and know very well how to have it properly tested. So I think that's just a routine that's developed now to keep people as safe as possible.
Still fascinating to me. Okay, are you ready for the next myth?
Yes, please.
And you know what? This is gonna be one of those. I can already see your answer in my head, which is gonna be yes and no.
Do you also see my Sasquatch chest in your head?
No, I don't see that right now. I
Thank
don't see
goodness.
that. And
I'll
no
stop
offense, I don't
shaving.
think I want to see it. All right. Here it is. More expensive products, like skin products, are better than cheaper ones.
That's a very tough question, and there are a couple of ways to look at this. The importance of skin products in terms of credentialing is based on how well developed they are, what the formulation is, what the ingredients are, and then most importantly, whether it's tested. Not just tested for safety, but also for stability, and then to ensure they do what they're purported to do. And here's the issue. In smaller companies, oftentimes they may not be able to afford or have the resources to do a lot of that development, formulation, stability testing, and then garnering the evidence to show that it really works. However, you also see in some very costly products that are floating by based on marketing hype and, quote, sex appeal, that they don't have much evidence either. So the problem that currently exists is there's a huge unmet need for a consumer's report, quote unquote, of skincare products. That is, how well they work, what's their evidence, and what are their pros and cons, and also in relative terms to their price point. So there is a large group of extremely well-researched products that have good evidence and they don't cost an arm and a leg. There's also a group of products that is more costly, without doubt. And remember, cost and whether it's cheap or expensive is completely a arbitrary term based on each person's level of affordability and circumstances.
Mm.
So, I don't try to insinuate to a patient whether it's expensive or not. Oftentimes, just price ranges can give them a sense of whether it's affordable to them or not. And I think that's a much more democratized way to talk about skincare. So, how do we look at skincare products then? Number one, the reason big companies can afford the magic in the formulation, the science of the ingredients, and then the valuation of the evidence is because they have resources. If these big companies don't provide the resources, then they're basically trying to sell based on marketing and not evidence. And that becomes problematic then. That was a very short answer. I think you'd appreciate my brevity.
But it's a very complicated answer and a complex one at that. And that's what I was saying when I introduced it. Like, I can see your answer of yes and no. It depends. because, like you said, it not only, everyone's got their own price sensitivities. Everyone's got different types of skins and have different tolerances for different types of ingredients. So it's what I got from it is, like anything else, try things, see if it works, see if it doesn't work. And if you can afford it, great. If you can't, then look at something else, but always try to experiment, I guess, is what I'm taking from your answer.
Well, the soundbite that is really effective currently is that there are products for everyone.
Hmm.
The nice part is that companies realize that there are different strata of, quote, affordability. And there's also aspirational products, and that's okay, but I think if there are very specific needs in skincare, there are different tiers of affordability that are out there. Richard, I do want to make this declaration. I have industry conflicts of interest in this topic. So
Okay.
everything I just told you, you should either take with a grain of salt or at least realize that I come at it with a certain amount of bias, because I do consult with a number of skincare companies globally.
Absolutely. So with that said, I'm going to ask you my next question. And again, if you'd rather not, because obviously, the transparency you're offering us in this conversation is very much appreciated, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you want, we will pass over it. But it is something that regular people face on a regular basis. And when I say regular people, I mean non-doctors. Um, Doctors are paid to prescribe you more expensive drugs. Obviously, Canada has got a very thorough generic program that pharmacies are very, and pharmacists can help on that side. But can you speak on that a little bit in terms of prescription drugs, treatments as well, and your role as a dermatologist and how you navigate all that?
So I'm going to speak only on a personal level because I can't speak for the profession as a whole.
Of
But
course.
quite frankly, I'm going to be absolutely frank about this. I don't even know what some of these things cost, except within appropriate ranges. Okay. However, what I can tell you is what I try to be very conscious about is how well the medication works for patients with that condition, that is the benefits, and then what are the potential risks. And then beyond that, what patients can expect in terms of how fast it works and how frequently we would need to monitor them, as well as how we monitor them. Now, there is no question that many of the new treatments that have developed over the past few years are extremely costly. We, however, specifically me, I'm not trying to speak as a profession, but maybe it is at least a voice for the profession, is that we have next to no jurisdiction over how these products are priced. So for me to be able to juxtapose how much I get paid, quite frankly, I get paid zero by industry, whether I prescribe product X, Y, or Z. The the outcome for me that's really important is to see the patient in follow-up, hoping that that patient will be so happy that when I walk into the room, they'll have a smile. And that all they have is positives and next to no negatives about their treatment or their condition because they've come along so well. Now, sometimes that happens with medications that are older and cost very little in terms of resources. For example, some of the corticosteroids that we use, some of the topical retinoids that we use are thankfully not particularly costly. But on the other hand, there are also some medications that are hugely, in my opinion, expensive. They cost a small car, medium-sized car, every year. And that type of patient who has that type of chronic condition, either they or their drug plan or some third party payer will have to bear that cost for a long period of time because it's, in relative terms, that's how much it's going to be costing.
Let's move on to something a little less heavy. And I think I personally know, I think I know the answer. Eczema and psoriasis are contagious because they look icky for a lot of people that especially don't suffer from eczema or psoriasis.
Okay, so eczema and psoriasis are contagious, not. The thing about eczema is a very general term for irritated, sensitive skin. And the likelihood is we've all had eczema. And in Canada, we call it eczema or dermatitis. The English call it eczema, the Americans call it dermatitis. Given the Canadian in-between role, we call it both, and we're fine with that. Because we juxtapose both. But effectively, there are many forms of eczema or dermatitis. One form that I think almost all of us know is the form that is related to allergies. So, for example, if you have contact dermatitis from poison ivy or to nickel or to rubber latex, those are all forms of dermatitis that are contact. Then there are patients who have atopic dermatitis. They're born with that tendency that is due to an innate dysfunction in the skin itself, along with the immune system activation. So thankfully, these are not contagious conditions. They may look red, inflamed, swollen, and extremely bothersome, but they don't go from person to person except genetically.
The next one is increasing humidity in your home, especially in winter, can help with eczema and psoriasis.
So increasing the humidity in your home with humidifiers and so on, I think has an important role to play. As long as you keep an eye on the levels of mold and yeast in that recirculating humidifier. So ensure that it's clean and it's not recirculating mold. The second part is, as far as humidity goes, the reason humidification helps and the reason a lot of patients with dry skin get so much better in the summer with greater levels of ambient humidity is because it moisturizes the skin. Skin that's well moisturized feels like a calf leather glove. Skin that's not feels like your work gloves at the end of the summer after they've been out in the rain. You've weeded, through mud and sleet and all the bad and the good. So one of the things that's really important to think about as far as your skin goes is treat it like a pair of your favorite leather shoes or your favorite gloves. Moisturize it regularly, and if it's wet, get it dry and then re-moisturize. And what you use is basically gentle cleansers and moisturizing creams. The best time to use them is when you come out of the bath or shower, because your skin has already absorbed a lot of that water. Now you seal it in. And the way you seal in moisture on the skin is with oil. And the reason oil works is because it helps to keep the shingles on the cells of our roof skin together. So the surface of our skin under microscopic assessments, imagery, looks like the shingles of a roof. And those shingles are made of what are called keratohyalin components that are very, very strong and rigid. But importantly, those shingles are held together by the glue that is called oil. Okay? And that's the oil that we make all by ourselves, natural moisturizing factors. And as the humidity gets lower and lower, we lose a lot of that natural moisturizing factor. And if you can support it and provide it more moisture, and then seal it with oil that keeps the moisturizer in and then helps to reseal those leaky roof tiles.
It's amazing how much we've built society around the human body without really knowing it. I never had that analogy that your skin are like shingles, but clearly they are. But when I look at like highways, I see the circulatory system. The police is your white blood cells. And now you're sort of telling me that essentially the thing that's over your roof that's protecting the innards of your body are actually called shingles on your skin, which do the exact same thing. So, and it makes sense as well, because you're right. We've all had dry skin and we can see, like, I'm assuming that white stuff is those shingles sort of separating itself from what they're supposed to do. Yeah.
It's absolutely right. You know, at the end of the day, when you go home today and you take off your shirt or take off your pants and you kind of flick it and you see all this material flying through, it's not lint. It's part of you. It's your DNA signature on the dead skin surface cells.
Wow. All right, continuing. The next myth, and this one's a little bit different than everything that we've done, but we did get the question. Computer monitors and TV screens emit UV rays or other kinds of radiation.
They do, but I think the thing is, the major concern with screens has been the issue of blue light. And, you know, one of the issues with blue light is whether it can cause more problems with skin pigmentation or skin aging. And I think there has been evaluations done over time about the amount of blue light we get, and the overall amount we get is extremely low. So, you know, I think as long as we're not like straight up close to our monitors, we're at a decent distance, the amount of blue light is very negligible. So as far as ultraviolet, I don't believe much of that comes through screens. But, you know, quite frankly, it's one of those things that if there was any significant amount of UV light, there would be two things that would have happened. One is we'd see a lot more skin cancers on computer geeks. Okay? All those folks working at Microsoft and Google will have major problems. Okay, and instead, they're indoors all the time, right? They're pasty white, and they're not at the beach because they're doing stuff that you know, with the FANG groups to, you know, moves their speedometer forward, and we don't see more of them getting skin cancers. So the folks that are getting the skin cancers are the people who are getting a lot of outdoor time, getting ultraviolet light, sunshine.
Yeah, I'm definitely falling that category of the pasty whiteness, and I've actually sort of developed my own defense mechanism against that against that joke, which is no, I'm not pasty white. I'm skin cancer free.
I love it.
So,
So you know, it's such an important issue that I'm going to come back to it, Richard, because one of the major messages I think we need to get right is that please get outside in the sun. It's great for your mind, it's great for your heart, it's great for your spirit, and just stay protected. Keep your hat on, keep your clothes on. Okay, occasional wearing Speedos is totally okay. But stay protected, because all the benefits of being outdoors, along with the protection to your skin when you do the things for sun protection, will keep you healthy, living longer, and your skin supple and beautiful.
excellent. And actually, you know what? The next myth is related to what we're talking about, which is cream sunblocks are better than spray on sunblocks.
Okay, so cream versus spray.
That's right.
Yes.
Or
Well,
cream are better than sprays.
cream are better. Okay, that's correct. Next question, please.
I love it. Right to the point. So really, you should avoid a spray on sunblock if you can.
The issue with the issue with spray is that we don't know really how much spray to use to get it to protect to the amount that we think it needs to perform at. So many of us guess. The second thing is that with sprays, remember some of these these propellants are flammable. So please do not use it around your local barbecue chef, unless you wish him to be flambéed. And the thing about cream application is we have much better ideas about the total amount that needs to be used. Plus, usually you can see where it goes, um, because you can see where it's distributing, where it's still shiny. With spray, it's much more difficult. Here's the good part about sprays. Are you ready? It wasn't all bad. The good part is it encourages people to use protection. And that's a really good thing. And if it gets them protected, it's quick, it's easy. You spray your kids as they're trying to run around and get away from you. At least you've got something going. But where possible, then try to slowly transition to the actual creams if possible.
Very good insight. The next one, which is our second last myth, is that acne treatments dry out skin.
Acne treatments can dry out the skin, but they don't have to. The reason they dry out the skin is often they are disruptive to the shingles on that surface roof structure. And when they do that, they cause drying. They can also cause problems with what we call desquamation or impairment of the skin barrier. Desquamation is that flaking off. The more sexy term is called exfoliation. So if you and I were marketing for a cosmetic company, we would say exfoliation with those dulcet tones. And exfoliation is really important because you're trying to remove that top layer of damaged skin so that it looks better. Okay? The younger, healthier skin has a certain glow to it, a certain softness and smoothness that the older layer doesn't impart to the surface. Now, the problem is most of what we're trying to do is to reduce inflammation. And the inflammation underneath the skin can be clearly improved with a number of medications that you can use internally. So you don't have to take it by apply it on the surface of the skin to get these medications to work. But even some of the internal medications can impair the surface barrier of the skin. For example, isotretinoin, aka Accutane or Purus or Claris, all of those can be, they are unsurpassed treatments for treatment of acne because they work so reliably, effectively in the vast majority of patients. But they can be also very drying. And the reason they're very drying is because they impact on that surface structural layer. So they can dry the skin, but it doesn't have to be for medications to help. There are medicines, for example, like some of the hormonal treatments that are taken by mouth, some of the antibiotic, anti-inflammatory treatments that are taken by mouth that get patients with acne a lot better, but they don't dry the surface of the skin. There are a number of creams that also don't dry the surface of the skin and still lead to improvement. So dryness is not necessarily a characteristic feature of medicines that work for acne.
The last one, and this is one that I left at the very end because this is your chance to just unload a little bit, to take stuff off your chest that have been possibly bothering you for some time, because you've been a doctor for some time in Canada and the United States, and you're also in a Western country, which means you watch a lot of TV shows that have doctors in them, and shows about medicine and shows about how it is to work in a hospital or an ER. What is it that bothers you? What is it that medical shows get wrong about being in healthcare or being a doctor?
What bothers me about medical shows, what really is my major peeve, is that I'm not on one of them. What the heck? I'm still toiling here.
Well, you certainly have a voice made for radio, and I would maybe argue a face made for radio too. No offense, but George Clooney plays a much better doctor than either of us would ever be.
I have to be frank with you. I actually really like some of the medical dramas. And, a lot of them have the sense that doctors know everything.
Mm.
And quite frankly, if you ask me to deliver a baby, you would see me running a sprint so hard, so fast. You ain't seen nothing yet. And part of the reason we do what we do is because, of course, we're here to help patients, but we're very siloed in what we do well.
Mm.
So the nice part about watching these shows is there is a certain level of fantasy about a lot of these characters. The fantasy is, unfortunately, we don't know everything. And I tell patients routinely, I don't know.
Mm.
But importantly, if it's important to you, I will look it up. And I think that type of thing we don't really necessarily see much on these kind of shows, is the understanding of that human conversation about the fact that we are human, we don't have everything at our fingertips, and we make mistakes. But we're not here to try to make mistakes. It's just that we're human.
It's funny because, at least for a long time, one of my favorite shows was House and Diagnostics, a curmudgeon, but he was a genius, so everyone let him be the curmudgeon that he was. But that was sort of very much the premise you're talking about, which is like, we'll get the answer eventually. It's just a matter of a process, although considerably glorified and Hollywoodized. Did you watch that show at
Absolutely.
all?
Yes, you know what happens if you're either a lawyer or a doctor or maybe in the police? You probably change the channel. And the reason is sometimes you just don't want to be inundated with what you do at work and then come home to the screen and watch anything except for FIFA highlight soccer games. Because you just don't need to be kind of in that environment again.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So you
Well,
know that there was a really good one called. It was around the era of Hill Street Blues, and I can't remember what it was called now. It was based in Boston. That was great.
so like this would be like in the 80s and 80s medical show, essentially.
That's right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't think of one right now myself. But nonetheless, we've already taken a lot of your time, Dr. Tan. This is the second episode of Skinopathy. This is the second episode of the Skinopathy podcast featuring Dr. Tan. And honestly, I think both of them have been a hit. You are a delight to listen to. You're very insightful. You're concise with your answers, and you seem so incredibly knowledgeable about everything and open about everything. I'm just so very happy you're doing this with us. So thank you, Dr. Tan.
It's my absolute pleasure, Richard, and thanks for the Sasquatch imagery.
I'll send you a link to the actual Seinfeld moment of that. It's an exchange between Kramer and Jerry, and it's perpetuated, I think, a lot of the myths that relate to coarse hair. But all that said, for all of you guys that are listening and you want to know more, if you want to reach out to Dr. Tan himself, go to healthyimage.ca. He also created a great decision tree type of tool for those suffering with acne called the website is inform-decisions.org. So that's where you'll be able to get a hold of Dr. Tan in some way, shape, or form. And thank you all so much for listening. Like, share, leave a rating, send us a question for Dr. Tan, comment on the podcast on how to make it better, or if there's any guests or any stories that you'd like to hear. We're here to make the podcast better for you. So until next time, go to getskinhelp.com, have that suspicious lesion or skin condition checked out by a skin specialist online, and keep that skin healthy.